We'll begin with the Nobel Peace Prize announcement coming out of Oslo. Chair Berit Reiss-Andersen is taking this speech. Let's listen in.
Women, life, freedom. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2023 to Narges Mohammadi for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran and her fight to promote human rights and freedom for all. Her brave struggle has come with tremendous personal cost. Altogether, the regime has arrested her 13 times, convicted her 5 times, and sentenced her to a total of 31 years in prison and 154 lashes. Ms. Mohammadi is still in prison as I speak. In September 2022, a young Kurdish woman, Masha Gina Amini, was killed in the custody of the Iranian morality police. Her killing triggered the largest political demonstrations against Iran's theocratic regime since it came to power in 1979. Under the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," hundreds of thousands of Iranians took part in peaceful protests against the authorities' brutality and oppression of women. The regime cracked hard down on the protests. More than 500 demonstrators were killed. Thousands were injured, including many who were blinded by rubber bullets fired by the police. At least 20,000 people were arrested and held in custody. The motto adopted by the demonstrators, "Woman, Life, Freedom," suitably expresses the dedication and work of Narges Mohammadi. Woman, she fights for women against systematic discrimination and oppression. Life, she supports women's struggle for the right to live full and dignified lives. This struggle across Iran has been met with persecution, imprisonment, torture, and even death. Freedom, she fights for freedom of expression and the right to independence, and against rules requiring women to remain out of sight and cover up their bodies. The freedom demands expressed by demonstrators apply not only to women, but to the entire population. In the 1990s, as a young physics student, Narges Mohammadi was already distinguishing herself as an advocate for equality and women's rights. After concluding her studies, she worked as an engineer as well as a columnist in various reform-minded newspapers. In 2003, she became involved with the Defense of Human Rights Center in Tehran, an organization founded by the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Shirin Ebadi. In 2011, Ms. Mohammadi was arrested for the first time and sentenced to many years of imprisonment for her efforts to assist incarcerated activists and their families. 2 years later, after her release on bail, Ms. Mohammadi immersed herself in a campaign against the use of death penalty. Iran has long been among the countries that execute the the highest proportion of their inhabitants annually. Just since January 2022, more than 860 prisoners have been punished by death in Iran. Her activism against the death penalty led to the rearrest of Ms. Mohammadi in 2015 and to a sentence of additional years behind walls. Upon her return to prison, she began opposing the regime's systematic use of torture and sexualized violence against political prisoners, and especially women, that is practiced in Iranian prisons. Last year's wave of protests became known to the political prisoners held inside the notorious Evin prison in Tehran. Once again, Ms. Mohammadi assumed leadership. From prison, she expressed support for the demonstrators and organized solidarity actions among her fellow inmates. The prison authorities responded by imposing even stricter conditions. Ms. Mohammadi was prohibited from receiving calls and visitors. She nevertheless managed to smuggle out an article which the New York Times published on the one-year anniversary of Mahsa Jina Amini's killing. The message was, "The more of us they lock up, the stronger we become." From captivity, Ms. Mohammadi has helped to ensure that the protests have not ebbed out. Narges Mohammadi is a woman, a human rights advocate, and a freedom fighter. In awarding her this year's Nobel Peace Prize, the Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes to honor her courageous fight for human rights, freedom, and democracy in Iran. This year's Peace Prize also recognizes the hundreds of thousands of people who in the preceding year have demonstrated against the theocratic regime's policies of discrimination and oppression targeting women. Only by embracing equal rights for all can the world achieve the fraternity between nations that Alfred Nobel sought to promote. The award to Narges Mohammadi follows a long tradition in which the Norwegian Nobel Committee has awarded the Peace Prize to those working to advance social justice, human rights, and democracy. These are important preconditions for lasting peace. Thank you.
Madam Chair, what impact do you hope that this prize will have on the situation in Iran?
This prize is first and foremost a recognition of the very important work of a whole movement in Iran with
to the Norwegian Nobel Chair Berit Reiss-Andersen announcing that the jailed Iranian activist Narges Mohammadi has won the Nobel Peace Prize. We'll be speaking to the chair of that committee, Berit Reiss-Andersen, later here on France 24. Joining me now on the set is our foreign editor, Kevin Kordestani. Hello to you, Kevin. Berit Reiss-Andersen outlining why Mohammadi was winning this award. Tell us a bit more about her.
Well, Narges Mohammadi is a 51-year-old activist, very involved in the fight for human rights. And this is why this prize was given to her, the Nobel Peace Prize, saying that it was for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran and her fight to promote human rights and freedom overall, if you will. Now, her name in Iran has been really become synonymous with this fight for women's rights in the country. And as the Nobel chair was saying, she really described how much of her life Narges has really given to this cause. I'll repeat, she was arrested 13 times, convicted 5 times, sentenced to a total of 31 years in prison. So really over the past 2 decades, Mohammadi has spent most of her life behind bars. And so she's really become one of the faces of this fight. But she is one of the faces. That is really how she has been working and continuing to do so behind bar, continuing to try to mobilize, to bring awareness. She actually did interviews from her prison cell, trying to get the word out, to keep the focus, the spotlight on what she was working for. And she has really focused, yes, on a women's right, but really human rights as a whole.
Yeah, and as you point out, one of the faces, and in that announcement, we heard that the committee also wanted to recognize the hundreds and thousands of people that have been protesting in Iran this past year.
Yes, and this really, this prize coming just a little over a year since the death of Mahsa Amini. She was the one who sparked these protests. She was beaten by the morality police for not wearing her hijab correctly, and her death really sparked something in Iran. Of course, these protests have been going on. There have been movements, especially among women. But her death really brought this together and triggered these mass protests that we saw. And Narges Mohammadi was also involved in this, also trying to bring more light, to try to make it so that the spotlight wouldn't fade from this movement, from this protest. And we've seen just a couple of days ago a new alleged assault coming to light, going viral across social media, of a teenage girl that seems to have been beaten by this morality police. Pretty much the same situation as Mahsa Amini, except in this case, luckily, it seems that she is still alive. And so the result was not exactly the same, but it is something that keeps happening. And people like Narges Mohammadi are trying to make it so that nobody forgets what is going on in Iran, and that the people, the young women, the young men who are fighting for these rights have continued support within Iran, but also around the world, so that the world doesn't really forget about what is happening there, even when the spotlight fades.
Indeed, and that spotlight now on Narges Mohammadi. She wins $1 million in prize money, as well as an 18-karat gold medal and a diploma. And the fight in Iran, as Kevin was saying, going back this past year with Mahsa Amini, but also decades before that. And that circle looks set to continue. Kevin, thank you very much. Kevin Gorgistani, our foreign editor, will be continuing to follow this story and others here on France 24. Thanks for watching.